Halo Infinite's winter update is finally here, and yes, that means that we finally have Forge and we can custom program our own game modes. This is so awesome. So, what I want to do today is I want to show you how you can make your own specific roles in your game modes. So, something like a Juggernaut, an Assassin, an Infected team member, just the possibilities are endless. So, in this case, what I've done is I've created an Airstrike Operator is what I call it, and one member of your team on each team. So both teams have one airstrike operator assigned to them at random in the beginning of the game, and they will be able to call in missile strikes on marked enemies. So what I'll do here is I'm going to jump in and just kind of show you what's going on. And yeah, so the first thing I want you to notice is that right when we drop in, we see, because I'm the only member of my team, it says you are the operator. So we got these bots coming in, and I'm going to start marking them. You see the ground is starting to flash over there. What we have here is a system that finds the point between all of the marked targets. So if we manage to mark more targets, you see how the missile lands in between both of them. So this will do this with any given number of targets. So you can have 3 targets, 4 targets, 5, however many. So if you get all 3 of these guys right here, okay, so yep, and you'll see there's a little bit of a delay. So it gives the enemy some time to run away from that flashing point. At least kind of gives them the opportunity to be a good player. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to exit play mode, and I'm going to find the script brain that I have written, if I can find it, that contains all of this logic. So let's go over to, okay, so that is for my missiles. This, I believe, is for my bots. And what I'm looking for is, hopefully I can find it. It'd be really silly if I couldn't. Okay, here it is. I got a little afraid right there, to be honest with you. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up. And so, well, first the name here that I've assigned to it is script assign commander. You see I'm still going with this nice naming convention here. It kind of makes things easy for you. What I should be doing is I should be locking these assets whenever I'm done with them. Just that way I know I'm safe and I don't start deleting something when I'm trying to make a masterpiece. So in order to do that, by the way, you can go over here into your folders, and then you can click on this little lock icon, and then boom. Now we know that we're safe. We're not going to delete this thing while we're in the middle of doing some crazy stuff. So that's just a quick tip. And also you should keep all of these scripts maybe near each other or near wherever, you know, their context is. You know, if it's for bots, maybe it's where they spawn. So, okay, I'm going to exit and I'm going to jump right into the node graph, and we're going to start taking a look at how I've got this set up. So, first, let's just look at what we have right at the top. So all the way to the left, what I've done is I've declared a couple variables. So we have 2 variables here. We have the player team Eagle Commander, and we have player team Cobra Commander. And I've just shortened Commander to CMDR, if that's what you're wondering about right there. So that's what we've got. And now you just have to place these nodes down, and then these will initialize. The script already knows that it needs to assign these variables, so it does that ahead of time. So you don't have to worry about anything like something not being initialized, you know, at a certain time or anything like that. Like, you can just throw these in here, and you'll know for the scope that you've defined these variables at, that they'll live there. And so to dig into this real quick, just if you're unfamiliar with variables, they're just kind of places where you're able to store information. If you need an explanation, that's as much as you're going to need for right now. There's a lot more behind that, of course. But in this case, this is a globally scoped variable because we want to access this variable in other scripts, right? So I have another script that's my missile script, and that script specifically handles how the missiles are fired and, you know, who's allowed to. So in this case, this script is only concerned with assigning who is able to do that. So I'm assigning that to the global scope because I want to access it outside of this script. Now, if I only use this variable in this script, we want to make sure that we set it to local because it's going to be more performant, which means it's going to be able to run better, I assume. Either that or it's not cluttering up some kind of global namespace. Now, the object mode, that is something that you can do. You can assign it specifically to an object, so you could declare a variable on an object that exists inside of the world. But we're going to focus today just on this global right here. Since this is going to be something important, you're going to want to access that variable from other places. So we're going to start off here, and we have this event right here on game start. This is just, and I'm not going to be able to, you might have to go and find a couple of these nodes. Digging through here and showing you exactly where they were would be a little bit redundant since they do have names. So I want you to just kind of go through and, it's more about the actual content and understanding what we've got here. So on game start, what I do is I trigger this custom event that I've created called event assign team commander, and I'm passing through a number here, just a single one. So this event, the way that I've got this event set up is that this event, whenever a number is, well, there's always going to be a number on this event since that's the way that I intend it to work. So you pass in a number, either 1 or 2, and that says either it is team 1 or team 2. Now, typically you deal with zero-based indexes in programming, but in this node graph editor, usually we're working with ranges that start at 1. So whenever you're working with lists are going to start at 1. So keep that in mind. So that's why I kind of chose to go with 1 and 2 here. So we also are doing this again, and then we're doing it with number 2. So I'm calling these events, and then this is just a way that I wanted to kind of decouple this because there are a couple different times when I want to assign a new airstrike commander, and I didn't want to have to rewrite that code multiple times. So in order to do that, I implemented these custom events. So try to think about how you can use events to decrease the amount of code that you have, definitely, and the clutter. It made this very, very clean, I would say. These are very isolated, segmented pieces of code. So moving on, if we take a look at something that handles this trigger here. So we have this trigger. So we're triggering a custom event, and it's going to be global. So that means that any other script is going to be able to listen to that event because it might be important to other objects in the world for this specific mode. Well, so we have this handler here on custom event global, and this is for our event assign team commander, which, remember, right when the game starts, we're going to fire this event that says, and I named this event. So let's go into this real quick and we can show you that. So this identifier right here, I've assigned this identifier, and this is my own naming convention. If you name it different, it's not going to break it, but just name it the way that you want to, and I would encourage you to be consistent about how you name things. It can really help you. What I like to do is I like to put the type in front of it. That way I always remember, what it was that I was naming, and then sometimes I also get into naming them in certain orders with verbs and nouns. So that can definitely help you when you don't know what something was called somewhere else. Just keep it really structured. So moving on though, again, this is handling this event, and we are going to, right when this event fires, we're going to branch. And what we're going to do is we're going to check what the value, that number that was passed in to that event, what was that value. So remember, it could be either a 1 or a 2. And I know this might seem kind of goofy at first, but there were some limitations with the Forge system, and they kind of caused me to take this little bit of an approach. So what we do, like I said, we check to see if it's 1. So 1, we're representing to be Eagle Team, and 2, we're representing to be Cobra Team. So we're going to branch, and we're going to say, well, if it's true, if 1 is what you gave me, then you want to configure Eagle Team, else you want to configure Cobra Team. So that's why it splits off right here, and that's why we're checking to see what that value was that came from that event. So each of these are actually identical pieces of code. And now I could probably take some time and maybe think about how I could improve this. However, this sort of structure kind of manifested from a little bit of a limitation where I wasn't able to store teams and lists, and I also couldn't refer to teams based on their index. So that kind of forced me into this position, and I don't really see a better way of doing this without kind of just like saying, well, one team is team 1 and one team is team 2. So, but what we do here, to take a look at the actual code on what's kind of happening on each of these branches, we're setting an object variable, and that variable, remember when we were talking about these variables over here, let me zoom in nice for you. These were player team Eagle Commander and player team Cobra Commander. And so you might only have one of these if you want one special, maybe like a Juggernaut or something. And then what I'm doing is I'm assigning this object in here. So right now the initial object is empty, and that's okay because these are allowed to be empty. But I'm assigning which player is the current commander for each team here in these variables. So what I'm doing here to set the player, remember, this was invoked all from the beginning. So we're going right when the game starts. We're going to trigger this event. We're going to come in here, and then we're going to set these object variables based on which team we're configuring it for. And make sure that when you are setting these variables that you're matching it with the correct scope. So I'm making sure that I have global scope here. And the way that we're doing this is we are getting a random player from the list of players on each team. So these nodes, the only thing different between them are these two teams. So you notice this is Eagle team, and then down here we have Cobra team. And what we're doing right after this is we're saying get all players on the team, and then those players, we want to know how many there are so that we know what's the highest random number to generate, and then we're generating a random number. And this range right here that we're defining, this range is from 1 and then to the size of the number of players that we have. And remember, it's based on, you're starting at 1. You're not starting at 0 like you might traditionally. So keep that in mind. So what we do is then we're getting an object from a list. So we're using get object at index, because this right here, this players, since it is plural, it's a list. So expect it to be a list. Let's grab a random player at a random, we're grabbing it from a random index, and then we're going to assign that as our commander. So you can see right there, that's how that happens. We're literally just doing it by picking a random number on the size of your team and then saying grab me that player and then assign it to that variable. And then something very important that I'm triggering after this, both of these are triggering another event. So we have an event team commander assigned event, which it is a little bit close to our event assigned team commander, and there might be a better name for it, but for now I kind of just flipped it around to where I said one is kind of a command and then one is more of an event. So the command being assign and then the event being assigned. So let's take a look at where we implemented that. So we have our trigger custom event global, and so let's see here. So right here we have on custom event global. So when a custom event on the global scope happens with the identifier of event team commander assigned, which remember that's the one that we just were talking about here when we grab that random player and assign them. Well, we want to let that player know that they're the operator. So what we're going to do here is we're going to say push a splash message to the player. And also, let me back up real quick, because this object here, you see how I'm saying the object of this event we're putting into the player variable here in this in this node. Well, we have that player available to us over here. So when we assigned that player to be the commander or the operator, they were passed into this event. And then that way, whoever's handling the event or listening to the event, they can also use that player. So you see this object here that's coming out of this get object at index, that's the player. So that's where we're assigning this value to this variable, and then we're also able to use that value when we trigger that event later on in the logic. So that is our player object, which we're able to push messages to through the push splash to player node. So, and then here what I'm doing is I'm creating a UI message. In this UI message, we have for our template, you are the string 1. And what that means here is, whoops, that means we're going to just say you are the, and then whatever we fill out here. And in this case, I just put operator. So when the game starts, if you're assigned to be the operator, it's going to display this message for 5 seconds. So that's how I managed to make the assignment system. But there's some very important cases that you need to remember to take care of. So for instance, players might get disconnected. I mean, they might rage quit. They might be in the middle of a thunderstorm. Their power might go out. Who knows what happens? But they've lost connection to the server while you're in the middle of the game, and you don't want that to ruin everybody else's fun. So what would happen in this case if somebody just left the game? Well, since we only handled this on game start, so if I go back up to here on the initial event of on game start, well, that's when we trigger to say, hey, we need to assign a team commander. But if we never do this again, if somebody leaves who is the team commander, then nobody will be able to call in airstrikes, and then the entire mode is kind of messed up. So it'd be like if the guy who's infected, you know, if they just left and then there was no other infected person, everybody would be standing around with nothing to do. So what we did in order to handle that right here is we're checking this on player exited event. So again, you can grab that right out of the events. It's actually events players, and you should be able to find in here there's an on player exited event, and that's right here. So this event is called when a player leaves the game, and what we're doing here is we're getting these variables that we've set before. So we've got our player team Eagle Commander and Cobra here, and what we're doing is we're just saying, okay, is the player who exited either of these players? So are either of these the operators right now? And if they are the same object, so it's a little bit messy right here, but all we're doing here is we're pulling this player into both of the object A's of this comparison right here. And then we're saying if either of them, so only one of these is going to be true because there's only ever one operator per team, and you can't be the operator of both teams. So we are just checking if either of these are the same object. And then we're saying we need to branch. So if this ended up being false, if neither of them are, if the player is neither the commander for Cobra team or Eagle team, well, then nothing will happen. So that's where this would just end. This branch would end. However, if they are, then what we need to do is we need to trigger a custom event, which is the event commander exit command. It's the identifier that we have right here, and we're passing in that player that we're triggering this event for. And so we have, again, over here another event handler, and this node right here is saying when the commander exits, what we're going to do is get that player's team, okay, and then we're going to compare if that team is Eagle team. If it is Eagle team, then we need to assign a new team commander. So let me slow down real quick here because I don't want to lose anybody. So these nodes that we've got in here, what I've done here for this team node and the way that you can refer to teams very easily, I should have backed up a little bit on that. Now, if you go into here into variables basic, we have team right here. And so if you ever want to do a comparison, what you do is you just go over to those properties, and these teams are available to you. So, oops, let's go back into here. And so that's just how I managed to get these team nodes in here for comparing. Now, we're just saying get the team that that player is on by saying get player team. We're grabbing the player from that event since we passed in when that player left. Because they were a commander, we're saying we need to pass that object through. And again, we're branching based on whether or not it's Eagle Team. So Eagle Team will be true, Cobra will be false. And that's why we have 1 over here and 2 over here for these numbers. Because remember, this event assigned team commander, what I've done is I've made it to where if it's 1, then it'll be Eagle, and 2, it'll be Cobra. And that's how I did that logic splitting up here. So that's pretty much it. It is, I would say, a little bit goofy to have to do stuff like this, and you know, there might be a better way to do it, and if there is, definitely somebody let me know. What I've ran into difficulties with here is just being able to represent teams numerically, like just based on their index within that list. That would be perfect. If we could just get a mapping for that or something. I'm not sure if that's possible, but if you have any questions on how I've implemented any of this, or if you need me to slow down or make any more content, please let me know. What I'm going to do here is just before the end of the video though, what I want to do is show you really quick how I am controlling who gets to control the rockets. So I'm going to keep the rest of my explanation for how I made the missile system because I have changed it quite a bit from the other video. I mean, there's just, if you're familiar with what that looked like at all versus what this is looking like, it's quite different. So, and unfortunately, I do have to kind of use these massive lines here in between because of the way that we need this code to work. But however, I'm going to attempt to split it apart, of course, later on. But just to show you kind of how I am controlling who's allowed to fire the missiles, well, remember that we fire missiles by listening to the marking system, or when you do the callouts. So when you spot an enemy target, this event here on player mark is going to fire. So what we need to do is, before we decide that we're going to fire a missile whenever we mark, well, first we need to check whether or not that player is actually the one of the commanders. So what we're doing here is we're saying we're using the R same object node, which is going to compare these two objects and say if they're the same, and that's what this output right here, R same object, that's what that'll output, either true or false based on that. And then this Boolean logic here is going to say or, so if they are the Eagle commander or the Cobra commander, that's what's happening here, since these get object variables are returning us that player object that should be assigned. If that is, if the player is either of these commanders, then we continue into here. Now, if the player is neither of those commanders, it'll be false for both of these conditions, and then right here it just stops. However, because they're the commander, we want to continue, and then what we do next is we say get the list size of all the targets that we've marked, and is that, and so notice here this is the get list size, and we're doing that based on the number of targets right here from this target list. So this target list on this mark, on this on player mark event, this target list is showing us this is just an object list containing players, so we treat players just like objects. Now what I'm doing is I'm taking this target list here, and then I'm getting the size of that list using get list size, which you can use on any object list, including player lists, of course, since they are the same thing. And we're going to take that count, and then we're going to compare that with 0. And what we're going to say is that A, which is our count of how many targets we spotted, is greater than 0. So that's what's happening right here in this compare. And now we're going to say if that's true, using this branch node, if that's true, then we want to continue firing that missile. So I push the message to the users that says, or rather this is just to the operator that says bombs go. But I want to leave it just at that because this does get really crazy, especially when we start getting into a little bit of this math right here for triangulating or finding the point in the center of all of those targets. But I do want to do that eventually and kind of give you a breakdown on how I did that. Also, just to note, the system is checking to see how many players ended up getting killed from that, and it does assign the operator 100 points for doing that if the player who was killed was on their team. So if you kill somebody who was on your team with a missile strike, obviously you shouldn't get any more points. So I did work in a system for that as well. So it's definitely getting there. We have a lot of really cool stuff with this airstrike system already. But I'm going to go ahead and end the video because this is getting pretty long already, and I know I probably lost most people. But again, if you need any help or if there's any suggestions that you have for how I should do this content, definitely let me know. But all right, well, let's keep it short, and I will see you guys in the next video, hopefully.